The massive colony ship drifted silently through space, its metal hull gleaming under the light of distant stars. Inside, 12-year-old Sarah Chen sat in the observation deck, her small hands pressed against the cold glass. To anyone watching, she looked like an ordinary child, lost in the wonder of space travel. Her dark hair was neatly tied back, and her school uniform was pressed perfectly, the very picture of innocence. But Sarah Chen was anything but ordinary. The first sign of trouble came as a low rumble through the ship's hull. Sarah's quantum processor, hidden beneath layers of synthetic flesh and bone, registered the vibrations instantly. Vraxian warships, 3 of them, based on their engine signatures. Her systems began running combat simulations even as she maintained her careful facade of childlike fear. The ship's alarms blared to life, filling the corridors with pulsing red light. Sarah heard screaming and the thunder of running feet. She stayed exactly where she was, knowing the Vraxians would find her here. That was the plan, after all. The colony ship's security forces didn't stand a chance. The Vraxians were known across the galaxy as ruthless slavers, and they had perfected the art of swift boarding actions. Sarah watched through the observation deck window as their boarding pods punched through the hull like metal wasps, disgorging armed warriors into the ship. She counted down in her head. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The observation deck door burst open. 3 Vraxians stormed in, their scaled bodies covered in battle armor, their yellow eyes scanning the room through tactical visors. They found exactly what they were looking for, a small, frightened human child, curled up in the corner. "Please," Sarah whimpered, letting tears fall down her cheeks. "Don't hurt me." The lead Vraxian laughed, the sound like gravel in a blender. Another soft human whelp, he growled in his native tongue. Sarah's language processors translated it instantly, adding the data to her growing tactical database. "This one will fetch a good price. They like them young and scared." As they dragged her away in chains sized for human children, chains they'd clearly used many times before, Sarah kept crying. The tears were real, not from fear, but from the activation of her infiltration protocols. Each tear contained millions of nanobots, now streaming down her face and onto the floor, beginning their slow spread through the ship's ventilation system. Through the chaos of the raid, none of the Vraxians noticed the strange pattern of lights flickering in the ship's systems as Sarah's quantum processor sent out its activation signal. None of them thought to question why this particular colony ship had been so easy to find, or why its defenses had fallen so quickly. They took her to their ship along with the other captured children, throwing her into a holding cell. The metal chains clinked as she huddled in the corner, playing the part of the terrified captive perfectly. The Vraxian guard watched her through the energy barrier, mandibles clicking in amusement at her apparent distress. "Sleep well, little human," he mocked. "Tomorrow begins your new life as property." Sarah looked up at him with tear-stained cheeks, her eyes wide and frightened. Inside her quantum processor, combat algorithms began their final compilation. The guard would never know that the small, trembling child he was taunting was actually Model X10 557, the most advanced hunter-killer infiltration unit ever created by humanity. As the guard walked away, Sarah allowed herself a tiny smile. Phase 1 of Operation TRJA was complete. The Vraxians had taken the bait. Now, it was only a matter of time before they learned why stealing human children was the worst mistake their species had ever made. 3 weeks into her captivity, Sarah Chen had become the Vraxians' favorite slave. The alien crew watched with satisfaction as she scrubbed their ship's corridors, her small hands working tirelessly with the cleaning tools they'd given her. They saw exactly what they wanted to see, a broken human child, accepting her new role in the universe. They never questioned why she cleaned the same security sensor panels over and over. "Look at this one," First Officer Crix said to the captain, his scaled tail swishing with pleasure. "No crying, no escape attempts. The others should learn from her example." Sarah kept her eyes down, hiding her brief smile. Her quantum processor was busy mapping every centimeter of the sensor panel's internal components. 3 weeks of careful observation had given her access to nearly 70% of the ship's security systems. The Vraxians' own rules made it perfect. Slaves were expected to clean everywhere, even in sensitive areas. "Girl," the captain barked. "Come here." Sarah shuffled forward obediently, keeping her shoulders hunched and her head bowed. Her sensors recorded everything: the captain's heart rate, body temperature, the weak points in his armor. "You will serve dinner in my quarters tonight," he said. "Do not disappoint me." "Yes, master," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling perfectly. Inside her quantum processor, victory protocols activated. The captain's quarters contained the main security override terminal. She'd been waiting for this invitation. Later that night, as Sarah carried dishes of alien food into the captain's quarters, her nanobots were hard at work. They'd spread through the entire ventilation system now, mapping every room, every corridor, every escape route. Through them, she could sense the location of every crew member on the ship. "You're doing well, slave," the captain said as she poured his drink. "Perhaps we'll keep you as part of our permanent crew. You humans are weak, but some of you can learn your place." "Thank you, master," Sarah replied softly. "I live to serve." The captain never noticed her scanning his security terminal as she cleaned the table. Her quantum processor added the new data to its growing database. 89% of ship systems mapped. 92% of crew weaknesses analyzed. 95% of security protocols decoded. Soon. The next morning, Sarah was cleaning near the engine room when another slave transport docked with their ship. She felt her circuits tingle with anticipation as the new slaves were brought aboard. Through the quantum entanglement network hidden beneath her synthetic skin, she sensed him immediately. Michael, another X10 unit. The Vraxians brought the new slaves past her. Michael was there, looking appropriately terrified, his dark skin streaked with artificial tears. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. In that instant, they exchanged more data than most computers could process in an hour. "Back to work." A guard shoved Sarah roughly. She stumbled, carefully calibrating her fall to look natural while protecting her crucial hardware. The guard laughed. These moments of cruelty would be remembered, categorized, and added to the growing list of the Vraxians' crimes against humanity. That night, as the ship's night cycle dimmed the lights, Sarah lay on her thin sleeping mat in the slave quarters. To the cameras, she appeared to be sleeping. In reality, she and Michael were having a complex conversation through their quantum link, planning every detail of what was to come. The Vraxians had made many mistakes in their long history of slavery, but bringing 2 X10 units onto the same ship, that was their biggest mistake yet. Sarah smiled in the darkness as her systems began the final preparation phase. The Vraxians thought they were creating perfect slaves. Instead, they were helping to orchestrate their own destruction. Through the cold nights of space, Sarah and Michael worked in perfect synchronization. To the Vraxian guards watching the security feeds, they appeared to be 2 slaves finding comfort in each other's presence. The guards even found it amusing how they always seemed to clean the corridors at the same time. "Look at the little mates," one guard chuckled to another. "Even humans need their own kind." If only they knew what was really happening. Every pass in the hallway, every shared meal in the slave quarters, every moment of pretended comfort, all of it was cover for an intricate exchange of data. Their quantum processors worked in harmony, sharing critical information about the ship's vulnerabilities. "The ventilation system in Section 7 needs cleaning," the overseer ordered one morning, pointing at Sarah. "Take the boy with you." Sarah and Michael nodded meekly and gathered their cleaning supplies. Once in the ventilation shaft, hidden from prying eyes, their true work began. Michael's nanobots merged with Sarah's existing network, doubling their capability to analyze and infiltrate the ship's systems. How many others? Michael's quantum signal pulsed silently. "I've detected 15 X10 units on nearby ships," Sarah's signal replied. "All in position. All waiting." Their processors synchronized, creating a detailed battle plan. The Vraxians had unknowingly created a web of their own destruction, connecting their slave ships into a vast network. Each ship carried at least one X10 unit, and through quantum entanglement, they were all connected. During mealtimes, the other slaves watched Sarah and Michael with mixed emotions. Some felt pity for what they thought were two broken children. Others admired their apparent resilience. None, not even the real human slaves, suspected what lay beneath those innocent exteriors. My systems detect a primary weakness in their engine cooling system, Michael shared during their evening cleaning duty. Confirmed. My nanobots have already infiltrated the coolant lines. Sarah responded. Time estimate to complete system compromise. 48 hours. They worked through their slave duties perfectly, never missing a spot, never giving their captors any reason to suspect them. The Vraxians even began using them as examples to punish other slaves who misbehaved. Why can't you be more like them? The overseers would shout. Quiet, obedient, knowing their place. Each praise was another victory. Each moment of trust brought them closer to their goal. One night, while cleaning the ship's bridge during the quiet shift, Sarah accessed a secured terminal through her nanobots. The screen flickered briefly as she downloaded the ship's entire communication protocol. Through their quantum link, she shared it instantly with Michael, who began decoding the encryption. Alert from Sector 7. A sudden announcement blared through the ship. Slave uprising on transport vessel K-19. All ships be warned. Sarah and Michael exchanged a quick glance. Their quantum network lit up with activity. Another X10 unit had been discovered too soon. The timeline needed to be adjusted. New parameters, Sarah signaled to the network. Acceleration required. All units prepare for early activation. The response came back instantly from across the fleet. Acknowledged. That night, as the Vraxians slept soundly in their quarters, confident in their dominance over their human cargo, 15 X10 units across their fleet began their final preparations. Sarah and Michael lay in their slave quarters, their systems running last-minute diagnostics. Tomorrow, the Vraxians would learn the true cost of enslaving humanity's children. Tomorrow, they would understand why humans had seemed so easy to conquer. Tomorrow, the hunter-killers would show their true nature. The perfect slaves were about to become perfect predators. The first sign that something was changing came during the night shift. Sarah lay on her sleeping mat, her systems running much hotter than usual. Deep within her synthetic body, millions of nanobots began their final transformation sequence. The time for hiding was almost over. Temperature spike detected in Slave Section 4, the ship's computer announced. A sleepy Vraxian guard wandered over to check. He found Sarah curled up, seemingly shivering. His thermal scanner showed her running a fever. Just a sick human, he reported back. Nothing to worry about. If only he knew that Sarah's fever was actually her combat systems coming fully online. In the next sleeping pod, Michael monitored Sarah's transformation through their quantum link. His own systems would begin the process tomorrow. They had to stagger their awakening to avoid drawing too much attention. One sick slave was normal. Two at the same time might raise suspicions. During breakfast, Sarah's hands trembled as she lifted her food bowl. This time, it wasn't an act. Her muscles were changing, synthetic fibers strengthening beyond human limits. When she accidentally crushed her spoon, she quickly hid it before anyone could notice. Clean the cargo bay today, the overseer ordered, not noticing anything different about her. Sarah nodded and stumbled slightly as she walked. Her center of gravity was shifting as her skeletal structure reinforced itself. The changes were becoming harder to hide. "You look unwell," a real human slave whispered to her during cleaning duty. "Should I help you?" "No," Sarah smiled weakly. "I'll be fine." The concerned slave had no idea that beneath Sarah's skin, military-grade combat systems were activating one by one. Her vision was now overlaid with tactical displays, marking structural weaknesses in the ship's hull and calculating the most efficient combat routes. By midday, Sarah could feel her strength had tripled. When she pushed a cleaning cart, she had to be extremely careful not to send it flying across the room. Her reflexes were sharpening too. She caught a falling bucket before it hit the ground, then had to pretend to fumble and drop it anyway. A perfect slave wouldn't have such quick reactions. "The girl is acting strange," one guard mentioned to another. "Humans often get sick," his companion replied. "They're weak creatures." Sarah kept her head down, but her enhanced hearing caught every word. Her tactical systems automatically added their voice patterns to the target database. Soon, very soon, those voices would change from mocking to terrified. That evening, while cleaning the engine room, Sarah's strength surge finally betrayed her. She accidentally dented a metal panel with her elbow. "What was that noise?" A guard walked over to investigate. I slipped, master," Sarah said, positioning herself to hide the dent. "The floor is wet from cleaning." The guard grunted and walked away. Sarah quickly used her nanobots to partially repair the dented panel. She couldn't fix it completely. That would be too suspicious. But she could make it look like old damage. "My transformation is at 89% completion," she signaled to Michael. "Combat systems are almost ready." "Understood," came his reply. "My sequence begins in 6 hours. The others are in position across the fleet." That night, as Sarah lay in her pod, her body hummed with power. Gone was the weak, fragile shell she had worn for so long. Her muscles were now reinforced with carbon fiber. Her bones were laced with titanium. Her skin had become subtle armor. Tomorrow, the Vraxians would learn why humanity had let them take so many children. Tomorrow, they would discover that they hadn't been capturing slaves. They had been collecting weapons. The X10s were almost ready to wake up. It began during Gamma Shift, when most of the Vraxian crew was asleep. Sarah stood up from her sleeping mat, her movements now smooth and precise. No more pretending to be a clumsy child. Her eyes glowed faintly blue in the darkness as combat protocols activated. Security systems compromised. She signaled to Michael, beginning Operation Nightfall. The first guard didn't even see her coming. One moment he was doing his routine check of the slave quarters. The next he was unconscious on the floor. Sarah caught his heavy body before it could make a sound, laying him down silently. Her enhanced muscles, now fully transformed, made the Vraxian's weight feel like nothing. "Eastern corridor secured," she transmitted, moving to Phase 2. Michael rose from his mat, his own transformation complete. Together, they moved through the ship like shadows. Their bare feet, now equipped with sound-dampening panels, made no noise on the metal floors. Every security camera they passed had already been compromised by Sarah's nanobots weeks ago. They'd reached the engine room first. 3 Vraxian engineers were monitoring the night shift. Sarah tapped the wall panel, sending a precise electromagnetic pulse through the ship's power conduits. The engineers slumped over their consoles, their neural systems temporarily scrambled. "Too easy," Michael commented through their quantum link as they secured the unconscious engineers. They never suspected a thing. Sarah accessed the main engineering console, her fingers flying over the controls. "Engine control transferred to my systems. Beginning ship-wide lockdown." The first real alarm came when a guard found his unconscious companions in the slave quarter. He reached for his communication device, but Sarah had already locked out all communication systems. The Vraxians were now alone and isolated on their own ship. "Alert! Alert!" The guard's shouts echoed through the corridors. "The slaves." He never finished his sentence. Sarah appeared behind him, moving faster than any human child should be able to move. One precise strike to a nerve cluster she had mapped weeks ago, and he joined his companions on the floor. "All hands." The captain's voice boomed through the ship's speakers, the only communication system Sarah had left active intentionally. "We have a situation in the slave quarters. All guards report." Sarah cut off the announcement mid-sentence. Through the ship's internal sensors, she watched the confusion spread among the awakening crew. They were running around with weapons, looking for an enemy they thought they understood. They were expecting a slave rebellion. What they got was something very different. Weapons control secured, Michael reported as he finished locking down the armory. All escape pods disabled. Sarah moved through the ship's corridors, dealing with any resistance she encountered. Her combat systems made it almost unfair. She could see in the dark, move faster than the Vraxians could react, and her knowledge of their physiological weaknesses made each encounter brief and decisive. "The bridge is next," she transmitted to Michael. "Ready for final phase." They converged on the bridge from two different directions. The captain had barricaded himself inside with his most trusted officers. They had sealed the blast doors and armed themselves with heavy weapons. Sarah almost felt sorry for them. Almost. "You know what's funny?" she sent to Michael as they prepared to breach the bridge. "They spent so much time making sure we couldn't get out. They never thought about what would happen when we decided to get in," Michael finished. Sarah placed her palm against the blast door, letting her nanobots seep into the locking mechanism. In the ship's systems, countdown timers reached 0. Across the Vraxian fleet, other X10 units were doing exactly the same thing. The hunt was about to end. The hunters had become the hunted. The bridge doors slid open with a soft hiss. The Vraxian captain and his officers spun around, weapons raised, expecting a frontal assault. Instead, the ship's ventilation system released a cloud of Sarah's nanobots, disabling their weapons before they could fire a single shot. "What is this?" the captain roared, pulling the trigger of his useless gun. "What sorcery?" "Not sorcery," Sarah said, stepping onto the bridge. Her voice was different now, no longer the frightened whisper of a slave. "Just better technology than yours." The bridge crew stared in horror at the small figure before them. Sarah stood straight, her posture perfect, eyes glowing with blue light. Through the ship's windows, they could see other Vraxian vessels in the fleet starting to drift out of formation. "You're not alone," Michael said, entering from another door. "Check your own fleet's status." The captain rushed to his console, his scaled hands shaking. Emergency signals were flashing across every screen. Ship after ship reported the same thing. Their slave children had taken control. "Impossible," he whispered. "They're just human whelps." Sarah walked to the main control panel, her movements fluid and precise. "Let me show you what a human whelp can do." Her hands flew across the controls, and within seconds, she had complete command of the ship's systems. Through their quantum network, Sarah could sense the other X10 units across the fleet achieving the same results. 15 ships, all taken in perfect synchronization. The Vraxians' own tight formation had made it easy. No ship could escape without risking collision with the others. "Status report," Sarah broadcasted across the X10 network. "Ship K7, secured. Ship L12, under control. Ship M3, bridge captured." The responses came in rapid succession. Every ship reported success. On their own bridge, the Vraxian officers watched in stunned silence as their entire fleet fell under the control of what they had thought were helpless children. Some tried to fight back, but Sarah's weeks of preparation had left them with no options. "You know what your biggest mistake was?" Sarah asked the captain, who had sunk into his command chair in defeat. "You thought size meant strength. You thought children meant weakness." "What? What are you?" he managed to ask. "We are Model X10 hunter-killers," Michael answered, his own eyes glowing. "We were designed for exactly this mission. You gave us everything we needed. Access to your ships, time to study your weaknesses, and a network of vessels to infiltrate." Through the ship's cameras, Sarah watched as the real human slaves were being freed on every deck. Many were crying with joy. Some were staring in amazement at their rescuers, unable to believe that their salvation had come from what appeared to be fellow child slaves. "Incoming transmission," Michael reported. "Human Liberation Fleet detected at the edge of the system. Right on schedule." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "Your empire of slavery ends today," she told the captain. Humanity knew you were taking our children. We let you take some of us, to lead you to take more of us. But you never took the ones you thought you were taking." The captain's yellow eyes widened with understanding. "All of them. Every child we took." "Not all," Michael corrected. "Some were real children, now being freed. But enough of us were X10s to ensure this day would come." Outside, the first ships of the Human Liberation Fleet were appearing from hyperspace. Sarah opened a channel to transmit their success code. On every ship in the Vraxian fleet, other X10 units were doing the same. The revolution wasn't just successful. It was perfect. The Human Liberation Fleet's admiral stood in full dress uniform on the captured Vraxian bridge. Around him, Marines secured the alien crew while medical teams tended to the freed slaves. At the center of it all stood Sarah and Michael, still looking like children, but now carrying themselves with the bearing of soldiers. "Mission accomplished, Admiral," Sarah reported, her voice carrying both pride and a hint of sadness. "The entire Vraxian slave fleet is under our control." The Vraxian captain, now in restraints, couldn't take his eyes off the children he had thought he owned. "All this time," he muttered, "all this time we thought we were breaking your young ones." "You want to know something interesting?" Sarah turned to face him. "Those tears I cried when you took me, they were real." The bridge fell silent. Even the Marines paused their work to listen. "We X10s were built from the minds of real children," Sarah continued. "Volunteers, children who gave up their normal lives to become something more. Every emotion you saw was genuine. The fear, the pain, the hope. We felt it all. We just chose to use those feelings differently than you expected." Michael stepped forward. "We cried because we had to watch real slaves suffer while we waited. We felt fear because we knew the responsibility on our shoulders. But most of all, we felt anger, not just programmed anger, but real, human anger at what you did to innocent people." The Admiral nodded solemnly. The X10 program was humanity's hardest choice. Using children as models for infiltration units went against everything we believed in. "But you Vraxians," he turned to the captain, "you gave us no choice." Through the bridge windows, they could see escape pods being launched from other ships. Pods containing freed human slaves, finally heading home. Sarah's internal systems counted each one, matching them against the database of known captives. "Do you want to know your greatest failure?" Sarah asked the captain. It wasn't getting beaten by children. It wasn't even underestimating humanity's technology. "Your greatest failure," Michael continued, "was thinking that humanity's love for its children was a weakness. You saw how we protected them, how we valued them, and you thought it made us soft. But that love," Sarah's eyes glowed brighter, "that love is what drove us to create the X10s. It's what made some of us volunteer to give up our childhoods. It's what made us strong enough to lie in wait, to endure your cruelty, to watch others suffer until the perfect moment to strike." The Admiral placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "The X10 program ends today. You've completed your mission. You can choose to be decommissioned, or—" "We want to stay," Sarah interrupted, speaking for all X10s through their quantum network. "We've seen too much, lost too much, to ever go back to being normal children. But we can protect others, ensure this never happens again." The Vraxian captain looked up, his alien features showing something close to understanding. "You didn't just defeat us," he said quietly. "You made us defeat ourselves." "No," Michael corrected him. "Humanity didn't make you do anything. You chose to prey on what you thought were our weakest members. You chose to build a society on slavery. We just showed you why those were bad choices." Sarah walked to the bridge's main window, watching as human liberation ships secured the captured fleet. Across every vessel, other X10 units were having similar conversations, explaining to their former captors the full scope of their failure. "We are humanity's children," she said softly. "Not its weakness, but its strength. Not its shame, but its pride. And anyone who thinks they can hurt us—" She turned, her eyes glowing with fierce determination. We'll learn why that's the last mistake they'll ever make. The age of Raxian slavery was over. The legend of the children who ended it was just beginning.